Think we are good to begin. Nice turnout already. Great. Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Anna Shevel. I'm the network coordinator of UnPoison, an advocacy NPO and multi-sector network of over 70 high-level experts, including many scientists, academic institutions, farmers, farm worker organizations, lawyers, agronomists, doctors, NPOs, researchers, etc. Our focus is advocacy and awareness around the impacts of pesticides. And so this webinar is certainly off topic, but it's something that has been troubling me increasingly as I have an acute awareness of trees in my environment and surroundings. And over the past 2 years after COVID, I've been observing rapid tree loss, massive clearing, and perimeter to perimeter development with no seeming sensitivity to the area or ecology. I saw a post recently from Mayor Jordan Hills that Cape Town is set to become the largest city in South Africa. And I read this week that the population is due to grow by over 1 million people in the next decade, putting pressure on infrastructure and services, and I believe budget cuts as well. So I've been wondering whether there is any ecological planning and biophilic design and what the story is with tree management in the Cape, and what the growth plans are and the impacts in the future if they are not adequately considered. Just admitting some people. So how is densification and development being managed in relation to our ecosystems and vital ecosystem services that, if disrupted, will significantly impact us with externalized costs and damage, etc.? And on top of all of this is shothole borer wreaking havoc. So how are we dealing with this? And in a recent chat with Francois, who happens to be a friend of mine, these issues came up with his personal concerns and direct experience. So I realized that this is a subject that needs to be discussed more. And I've followed a series of breadcrumbs that has led me to our speaker lineup today. And in so doing, I have learned that I'm only scratching the tip of the iceberg. And tree management, urban planning, conservation, etc., are all controversial. And there are as many different perspectives and methodologies for each as there are people examining each topic. And it's exactly the same with UnPoison and agriculture and chemicals, etc. There's a very wide spectrum of people that have very differing opinions, but ultimately we're all on the same side working towards the same thing. And there's not a one size fits all. It's oversimplification. I think things are often a bit more nuanced. So I personally am here to learn more, and my invitation to you, no matter how new the topic is to you or how experienced, that you listen with an intention to learn something from each speaker. And I hope that this is the start of a conversation, or it's the start for me. It's probably being continued for others. That will ideally add to the future planning and tree management policy for a better Cape Town. So that's that from me. A little bit of housekeeping. Please will you keep your microphones off? For those of you unfamiliar with Zoom, it's best to use speaker view. And hopefully we will have time for questions after each speaker if we run on time. So that's it. And now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Francois, who has been an arborist for 35 years, manages trees in Ardeen Gardens and Kirstenbosch, and owns one of the most magical places on earth, Platbos Forest. And it's also Francois's first time on Zoom, and possibly even on a computer. So good luck, Francois.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks. I think just to start off, it would be wise to point out that we are losing the battle for tree cover. There's no doubt about that. There's no point in debating that. However, that is a recent phenomenon. And actually, when I started my career in Cape Town in the 90s, a lot of the urban growth or urbanization and population growth led to more trees. Vineyards were cleared and replaced with gardens. the plot sizes were larger. So although the city was sprawling and spreading, in terms of tree cover, things were improving. Avenues were planted along new roads. Hout Bay was plantation forestry, which was essentially low quality trees of pine and gum, were replaced by amenity trees. And I think in many ways the ecosystem benefited from the urbanization that we saw back then. That's an historical perspective when plot sizes were still large. But now it's a different picture. There's a policy of densification and there's a hunger for rates and services, and developers are making plots smaller and smaller, and there is simply no space for trees. I think it's true to say that the majority of planted urban trees will be cut down for reasons other than health and old age. The majority of trees eventually either start lifting a boundary wall, blocking a pipe, getting in the way, or simply outgrow the scale of the garden. And I'm very much at peace with the fact that chainsaws are an integral part of urban tree management. We need to cut down many trees. However, the lifespan of a tree is getting shorter. So in other words, it's cut down smaller as the scale of the environment changes. And that's something that we need to look at. And it amounts to an overall net loss of tree cover. So the process that is happening with densification is that we arborists are caught up in a sort of a greenwash where trees are ostensibly protected. We get called to do tree surveys prior to the development. It's a whole growth industry for us. Then there are tree protection plans that have to be drawn up and allegedly adhered to. But what happens in reality is that the trees get destroyed, the bulk of them in an initial fairly brutal site clearance, and then in small increments thereafter. It's important to know that a tree takes up to 5 years to respond to construction damage. So we have sites that the development is named after a species of tree, Cypress muse or something like that. And 5 years later, there are no more cypresses, or there are cypresses in little concrete pots. And it is a way of killing trees by 1,000 cuts. It's very unfortunate, and I do believe it to be a fairly cynical process. Certainly from my perspective, it's a very cynical process where there are administrative hoops to be jumped through in the process of destroying a system. Another part of this that irks me a lot is that arborists tend to be called in once designs have been submitted by architects. And it led to such a degree of frustration that I checked in with an architect friend of mine and asked him, so how much did they teach you about trees at architecture school? And he said, no, nothing. And I was like, but surely a little, no, absolutely nothing. For the last 2 years, I have done one 40-minute lecture slot for architecture students at UCT. And as far as I'm aware, that's the first. So the level of knowledge, in the meantime, I know an awful lot about construction techniques that can preserve trees. And I'm continually amazed at how that similar information about tree roots and what impacts they can sustain in order to survive on a site is not being learned by developers, planners, architects, and even landscape architects. There's to my mind, a serious drawback in a landscape architecture in that they can do it as, I think, a master's coming from any school of any standard education. So you can go to university and do a BA in history and then get into landscape architecture. You need not have any plant knowledge. And that's a further drawback. So there's a lack of technical knowledge in amongst landscape architects and architects in how to preserve trees on sites. And inevitably, we get called in once the damage has been done. How can you save this tree? Well, I could have saved it by telling you to set the building back before you built it, but now it's a bit late. And so the trees slowly get removed from the landscape, and the leafy the leafy suburbs are the ones where the money is to be made. And it is in the leafy part of that suburb. So very often the original house stays, the people made inadequate provision for their old age and sell off the bottom of the garden for 3, 4 units, densely clustered. And even if a tree is successfully maintained and preserved on those sites, the chances are that the people who buy those sites feel overwhelmed by such a large tree. It's out of scale. It used to be at the bottom of someone's garden, and now it's in someone's face. They worry about it when the northerly blows. They worry about it drops leaves. It perhaps gets aphids and makes their outside furniture sticky. It has impacts, negative impacts on them that it never used to have for the original owner of the 1,000 square meter plot, because it was at the bottom of his garden. So we find that tolerance for trees gets less. We also find that people become more and more litigious and risk averse. So trees have fewer and fewer chances. And that relates to the impact on privately owned trees. And I think it's important to note that densification also has a negative impact on municipal trees, on street trees, because it requires road widening for greater traffic loads. It requires new driveways for these new units. And very often they slap bang opposite a majestic tree in an avenue, and that tree will give way for densification. Boundary walls. The people moving to densified units tend to be risk averse in their personality, and therefore they would like tall boundary walls. This is not good for trees. They also like to watch the cricket and rugby and have solar panels. Solar panels have had a devastating effect on our urban trees. We have lost so many since load shedding began. It's another small garden, a small house and small plot with solar panels means no space for a big majestic tree. So in all of these things, the trees are the losers. I try to speak for trees and get clients to empathize with the plight of the treescape. But inevitably, the trees are on the losing side of this battle. And if you add to this bark stripping, which is not just happening in Newlands forest, it's also happening in our urban forest. We are losing many species. It's no longer practical to plant camphors and many indigenous species of tree. Add to this climate change and Arbor Day. We have a culture where we plant at Arbor Day, which is the beginning of summer in a winter rainfall region. Now, what our city fathers are doing, I thought that local government and regional government were there to address issues specific to the locality and region. So what more basic thing is there than to acknowledge that we have a climate that does not allow you to plant trees at the beginning of a dry summer, yet we do it. And as a tree planter at Platbos, we have an ambitious reforestation program. We've planted over 150,000 trees. And I will not plant trees after the first week of July. We start in April when the rains come. We plant in May and June, and we need to be finished by the first week of July. Yet here we are in a water-stressed province, trotting school kids out and politicians grabbing plated spades, shiny spades, to plant trees at the beginning of summer, and then tell us to save water and to respect water restrictions. There's a disconnect there. And I think that it speaks to many other disconnects that we have as a culture. I did my training in arboriculture and forestry in Germany and in England. And I found that those cultures had a far greater sympathy for trees and a far greater understanding of trees, and trees were far more integral to the culture of those people than us as South Africans. I think we have a very cavalier attitude to trees, and especially the South Africans of European descent tend to have a slightly an attitude of the settler where there's another tree and another tree, and don't worry, we'll never run out of space and trees. And we actually have reached the point where we are running out of space and trees. And the last sort of pressure on the trees with of the three big ones, I'd say, is PSHB, the shothole borer. Added to this already problematic scenario, we have got PSHB, and it targets mostly oaks and planes and maples. So these are the species that grow within the belt of leafy suburbs. They're not the species that grow on the sand. So they will affect the greatest intact portion of our urban tree canopy. The part that really is under pressure from densification is also under pressure from PSHB. And the infestation has already cost us about 6,000 trees. We don't know exactly. That's an estimate. Added to that, we probably lost around about 2,000 trees to the winter rain. Generally, our winter storms cause trees to break. This winter was accompanied with so much rain that many, many trees uprooted. And that 2,000 is also an estimate, but it's a fairly good one. So if you put those two, just those two, excluding densification, you come up with 8,000 trees. The city nursery at Newlands has told me that they've planted out in the region of 2,500 trees in the financial year. They aim to do so in this financial year, and a similar amount was planted in the last financial year. So that will do little to decelerate the rate of decline of our tree cover. The private sector is doing probably worse because all of us, our hands are tied by densification. You can't plant a tree where there's no space to plant it. You can't plant a tree in a paved garden where there's too much infrastructure. People know that it will end up costing them. And then there's some issues like the city parks does not have the means to effectively remove stumps out of the urban landscape. So in many cases, the only place to replant was in situ, where you lost the tree to shothole borer. Yet you need that stump out. You can't wait 25 years for the stump to rot. The final thing that I want to touch on in terms of our problematic relationship with trees is the issue of the false binary that we have around exotics and indigenous trees. So we have been saying for many years, indigenous good and aliens bad, exotics bad. And I think that is a very damaging oversimplification of something that requires a lot of nuance. So where the outside of the city boundaries, we have Table Mountain National Park, where most definitely fynbos belongs and aliens don't belong. We have in those areas Afro-montane forest that is restricted mostly to cliffs. It should be very clear to anybody who's tried that those cliff species are mostly not going to work in an urban area. They grow in deep soils and are permanently watered by the stream in the cliff. And to try and plant those out in the Cape Flats areas where actually trees never occurred on that landscape is foolish. Then we have also gone for hardier so-called indigenous. And I would like to use one species as an example, the waterberry, Syzygium caudatum. It's not from the Western Cape, it's from the Eastern Cape. We brought it down here. It is infesting watercourses all through the Overstrand. I'm responsible for a few properties out there, and I can tell you that I've felled many thousands in the last few years, dense thickets of it. I not entirely sure how its impact on biodiversity can be considered any less than the impact of any other invasive that does not belong there. It's an extralimital indigenous invasive species. Uh, then we have many, many, many exotic trees that are not invasive. And usually there are fairly clear signs as to what would constitute a tree becoming invasive. So I think that there's a lot of research that needs to be done to broaden the palette of species that are available to us to plant out in the urban areas. The Ardennes is involved in such a research project. As the ravages of PSHB continue and climate change continues and potentially water restrictions may continue, this winter might be a flash in the pan. We need to look at climate resilient, PSHB resistant trees, preferably trees that don't have aggressive root systems, and given densification, trees that mature smaller, the smaller trees. We need to research these species and bring them here. And obviously, there's very clear questions. Do they sucker vigorously? Are they fire adapted? Those would be the first two questions to ascertain if they are invasive, have the potential to be invasive or not. But the idea that we should exclude trees based on the fact that they are not endemic to our cliffs in the Western Cape is very problematic. And I think that it's important to sort of point out that in the realm of the urban forests, the profession of arboriculture is the profession that focuses on this, not botany. However, my industry has been largely unregulated, unrecognized, disorganized. And into that vacuum has stepped some very well-intentioned conservationists and botanists. But many of the recommendations that have been made lack nuance, lack knowledge. The criteria, for instance, for a street tree is very, very, very specific. There are thousands of trees that have been trialed as street trees and failed. A street tree is a very special kind of thing. It's a gangster tree, essentially. So having botanists dictating urban tree policy is sort of like a form of urban sheep herding. It doesn't work. It's not appropriate. There's a need for the those who subscribe to the ideas around nativism, the desirability of indigenous trees over all other trees. They need to stay in their lane. That has a place, and it's outside of the urban edge. Then we also need to look at the peri-urban areas, the urban edge itself. There's an example of, for instance, Raterplatz, where Raterplatz is coming under pressure to remove the few remaining exotic trees that are of the pine family or the eucalyptus family. Based on the idea that these are a fire risk to the greater Hout Bay and to Raterplatz itself, and that they are exotic. So adjoining Raterplatz is a landscape of moribund fynbos that has, I'm not sure when it last burned, but I doubt it's burned for 50 years. So there is no, as far as I know, there's no huge pressure on Parks Board to do the right thing and to do a controlled burn of that fynbos and thereby reduce the fuel loads to a negligible level. So fire suppression on our mountain leads to massive fuel loads, which then leads to the finger being pointed at urban trees and saying, these trees are a risk. They're a risk from what? From an extremely high risk fynbos on the mountain that hasn't burned for unnaturally long time periods. The area of Hout Bay is specifically a good case in point. It's really, really bad up there. So I think when you take all of these factors together, we are not behaving as a society in a way that is going to leave many trees for our grandchildren. And I think that the political fathers have prioritized so many other things, especially rates and growth. And the result of this is what we have. I think City Parks does its best with limited budgets, but there's a reason why City Parks has such limited budgets. It's that the political fathers don't take tree cover as seriously as I believe they should. It's that we stand to lose 40, 50% of our urban tree cover in the next few decades. Yet there is no sudden rush of funds to the Newlands Nursery, no expansion of its capacity, no urgency that one can sense from our political fathers in addressing this. So I
Francois, I'm
think
going to
we
say that
essentially,
we need to wrap up in a minute.
okay, what I need to get to is that we really have a choice of being the generation who were responsible or oversaw the loss of the urban tree cover, or we can plant. The losses are inevitable, and we will be remembered as a time of tree loss. However, we have that option of being remembered as those who planted. And I think that that is the most important thing we need to address.
Thank you so much, Francois. In our personal chats, there was something else that came up for you. I'm not sure if you omitted it because of time or intentionally, and that was on stump removal. Is that something that you want to throw in
I
quickly?
did touch on it, yeah, that City Parks does not have the capacity to remove stumps efficiently. So in the private sector, we make ample use of stump grinders. And this is important because where space is limited and a tree comes out, you need to be able to remove that stump and plant in situ. And this is something that the city is currently unable to do. So we'll be looking at a lot of stumps lining what were once avenues at, if we do not address this issue.
Thank you, Francois. There are some questions in the chat. I might need to hurry, but my takeaway from your talk is just questions around whether there is really a tree strategy and who is contributing to the tree strategy if we have all the right people in the conversation that are contributing to that. And from what you have shared, we have a radical net loss after
Yeah.
after all of these pressures and the city's replanting capacity, we're having this radical net loss. And as I'm sure everybody in this room, we're experiencing the pressures of climate change and extreme weather. Most of us have a green or environmental affiliation and understand the ecosystem services, absorbing water, the cooling effects, and all of these kinds of things. So yeah, these are things that I really, really hope will be discussed further, and I hope that the conversation will be expanded. Thank you.
Yep. Sure. Thanks.
I think that there's some questions around shothole borer. What about plant insect relationships with trees? 75 to 90% have specialization. I'm going to say that we'll answer more questions at the end so that we can move on to Nikki Schmidt. And she is going to be presenting the treeless biome versus a livable and sustainable city, Cape Town's shrinking forest and the challenges on it, and why urban forests are necessary, and many other things that I'm looking forward to hearing. So, Nikki, won't you please, um, where are you? Have you got your camera on, Nikki?
I have.
I can't see. Okay, excellent.
Yeah. Anna,
Brilliant.
will you enable me to share my screen, please?
Absolutely. It is enabled already. You should be able
Okay,
to.
perfect.
Brilliant. Over to you.
Can you see that?
I can't yet, actually.
Okay.
It's always, there we go. Now it's starting. And sorry, I forgot to say that Nikki Schmidt is the founder and chair of the voluntary NPO Parkscape. let me just move this over. Parkscape seeks to ensure the retention of cultural landscapes and the creation of safer urban greenscapes and urban forests in the buffer zones and wildland urban interfaces of the Table Mountain National Park. Technical issues sorted. Over to you, Nikki.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna, for this opportunity, and good afternoon to everyone. Francois already covered some of what I'm going to be covering, and I think I'm just going to take it in a slightly different direction. My key concern is the crisis of livability that we have in the making with the loss of our urban forest. I'm going to give you an overview of what I'm talking to, the quest for the livable and sustainable city. First of all, what is a city? The inequality of Cape Town's urban forest, the urban forest policy, the shrinking size and challenges of Cape Town's urban forest, why urban forests are necessary, the global position on urban forests, and the risk to Cape Town from a too limited urban forest, and then I'm going to suggest some ways forward. So first of all, what is a city? More than 80% of the world's population live in densely populated and village biomes. They're the largest habitat that humans exist in. They're a form of nature in their own right, and yet the term biome, until recently, has not included urban areas. Referring to cities as anthropogenic biomes or anthromes acknowledges the inextricable intermingling of human and natural systems. We can't get past that. Nature and cities are interconnected. Cities are people spaces. Green space in an urban environment must be understood as a form of human modified nature. And moving forward, our cities have to be designed for resilience, sustainability, and livability. Otherwise, we are going to be in serious trouble. So what makes for a livable and sustainable city from a point of view of the natural and the built environment? Well, we're looking at blue-green spaces that meet urban needs, human needs for health and well-being. Those might include conservation areas, wetlands and riverine corridors, parks, verges, streets, sports fields, community gardens and allotments. And critical to these spaces are trees. Now, if we look at this image, this is the NDVI scan of the Earth. This one is from March 2024. And it basically shows the levels of chloroform across the city. You'll see that to the right, that's the Cape Flats. It's predominantly red, and it indicates, by and large, a very treeless environment. Then we have our leafy suburbs to the left. We notice the very dark green patch that is Newlands Forest and Orange Clove. But we have a distinct legacy here that needs to be redressed. This is just to show you the difference between Khayelitsha and Constantia when it comes to a treed space. Likewise, a similar shot, we have Newlands Avenue and we have a road in Khayelitsha. This is our apartheid legacy. This is the challenge for our urban forest. Now, there are a lot of people who say, but trees can't grow on the Cape Flats. And the Cape Flats has no forest canopy, and it is a dense, densifying, and predominantly treeless urban area. Argument states that the trees can't grow in this hostile environment because of the wind, the drought, and the flooding realities. But the same reality likely once applied to suburbs like Plumstead and Pinelands, where early city planners planted exotic trees, many now on the NEMBA invasive species list, to create urban canopy, which created a nursery for other trees and other plants. What's interesting to note, and you'll see it in the two pictures on either side of the screen, is that we are growing Miyawaki Sugi forests using indigenous and other species on the Cape Flats, where communities have bought into the concept of needing urban trees in their communities. And these little forests are starting to flourish. They're being grown in school grounds, in community spaces, and this is where people start to make a difference. This is where we can grow the urban forest and should be growing the urban forest. If we come into this a close-up of the Newlands Forest area. Newlands is one of Cape Town's most significant green lungs, and it's critical to the city. We had two other primary green lungs, and those were the plantations of Takai and Cecilia, lost to the forestry exit strategy of 2005, driven by the fact that it was a national park and that we can't have aliens in the national park. Trees will grow in those spaces, and they don't have to be pine trees. If you look at Newlands Forest, you will see that increasingly, without a fire regimen, the forests are spreading out of their ravines and spreading across the slopes of the mountain, creating a bigger urban forest critically to the city. That is such an important green lung. And while the question of biodiversity conservation is not in question, the loss of these green lungs is a very real loss. Now, Francois raised the question, or Anna raised the question about what is the strategy. Well, the city does have an urban forest policy, and thank goodness for that. The question is whether this policy goes far enough. At present, Cape Town has only 6% urban forest. That is a woeful amount of urban forest. Between 2001 and 2020, when the bulk of the Takai and Cecilia plantations were felled, we lost 5.9% of our urban forest. That's between 800,000 to 1 million trees if one works out the number of trees planted per hectare in forestry. That reduced the urban forest canopy from 12% to the current 6%. Now, the city's urban forest policy intends to grow the urban forest to 10%. That is significantly well below the research global trends for urban environments that aim for a minimum of 30% cover. Part of the reason for only aiming for 10% is because purist conservationism intervened in what that urban forest policy should be. And this is where Francois' point is quite apparent. Botanists need to stay in their lane. We are in an anthropogenic biome. We are no longer in a fynbos biome or a treeless biome. We are in a city, and that is critical for all of us to remember. So we have a number of challenges to our urban forest. The polyphagous shothole borer, which Francois has referenced, bark stripping, which Francois has referenced, inappropriate urban densification, which gives us a potential loss of more than 40%, which, given we only have 66% urban forest, will take us down to probably 3% and below. On top of that, we have a purist biodiversity conservation position that is at odds with and precludes the human needs and realities of a city. I've mentioned before that some will argue that Cape Town is sited in a treeless, critically endangered fynbos biome. But again, Cape Town is a city, and cities are about people. We need to look at this anthropogenic biome differently. And city policies must be designed to meet human need first and foremost if they are to be livable and sustainable going into an uncertain future. If we move to densification and the loss of the urban forest, what we have here in this particular image is a piece of urban forest in Constantia. What we have below that image is what is proposed for that little pocket of urban forest. Densification includes building townhouses, subdivision aligned for multiple dwellings, high-rise apartments, high-rise flats, and the proposed municipal planning bylaws, with a heavy focus on densification and commercial interests, strips away heritage and environmental overlays and property rights. And across Cape Town, communities are deeply angry and increasingly angry. This is one headline, one recent headline. And this area is in Rondebosch East, where residents are calling for community spaces and are absolutely rejecting the densification that is being proposed by the city. Now, there aren't very many trees on this space. Densification will allow for even fewer trees. But if there was a balance between the densification and the creation of people spaces, this could provide so much upliftment to this community that it would make a world of difference to the community, and it would make a world of difference to the urban forest. Here is another impact of densification, and this is currently quite a hot potato. This is a property in Constantia, heavily treed with a lot of indigenous trees, old trees, and all of it has been felled for profit and a view. And in doing this felling, it's also destroyed a large chunk of greenbelt, but I'm not going to get into that in this presentation. Then let's move to the biodiversity and the loss of our green spaces. We had, before the park was formed, extensive research was undertaken by UCT's Environmental Evaluation Unit. And the park's formation was predicated on that research. And it was research that was groundbreaking for its time. Takai in 2001, as you can see on the left, was a plantation. It was a key green lung. It contained thousands of trees. Today, Takai is a mess of invasive aliens, and it's a fight to restore the fynbos. But we've lost the green lung. Not all green space is created equal. That's the other point, and that's what the NDVI scans show. Here, to the left of this image, we see the restoration of Cape Sand fynbos surrounded by the Takai plantation, which is a triangular piece, and the surrounding green belts and the river Rhine course and wetlands of the restoration site. In summer, the temperatures in the fynbos are a good 6 degrees higher than the plantation. So people avoid it, they stick to the shade of the pines, and that's not to say that the pines should stay. Those pines can be transitioned away to indigenous trees, which will benefit the community, will benefit the environment. It will impact the flooding that we currently see in Lower Takai, and it will cool the suburb. And that's just one example. Now, if we come to the arguments for removing the old plantations and the arguments for removing exotics in our urban environment, these are the arguments that are used. They're aliens. In an urban environment, exotic trees can and do play a critical role, growing where indigenous trees will not grow. And these trees, which may be invasive in certain environments, are easily contained under the managed conditions of a city. Then there's the talk of the fire risk. Trees don't create fire. Poor land management and poor law enforcement creates wildfire risks. And again, that's something that Francois has referred to. Then there's talk of the water threat. In the city, we are not in a classic catchment area. Our catchment areas are in Theewaterskloof, the Berg River Dam area. That's where the bulk of our water needs are met. Trees along the rivers and near wetlands in the urban environment provide a critical element of urban livability and resilience and benefit human health and well-being. Remove the aliens from our catchment areas, absolutely. But think twice about removing or not planting trees in urban blue-green spaces in the anthropogenic biome. And yes, fynbos is critically endangered and it should be protected. But it's worthwhile bearing in mind that in its natural state, the fynbos biome is one that requires nutrient-poor soil. Cities are rich in nutrients, particularly airborne nutrients such as phosphates and nitrates, and then there are all the other nutrients that result from human activities. To quote Professor Eugene Moll, at best we can garden, but we cannot expect to restore the ecosystem given the urban impacts. Let's look at this purist conservation position for a moment, or what is called nativism. And it's not me saying this. I'm going to quote from Jonah Peretti from the University of California. South African environmentalists have had considerable global influence on the concept of invasion biology. The conservation mindset is driven by a particular purism of biological nativism historically associated with fascist and apartheid cultures and governments. Apartheid-era thinking is concerned with separating the pure from the impure, and this is what we are seeing. He notes that even anti-racist scientists living in an apartheid culture may have been influenced by and carried forward this sort of purism. It has no place in an anthropogenic biome. It has no place in a city. And we need to guard against reinforcing a politically conservative nativist agenda. It's worthwhile noting at this point that Sandparks' Vision 2040 endeavors to move away from a Western and apartheid-era fortress conservation model to one which is inclusive of people and communities. That's important to look at. That's important to consider. The impact of the purist thinking on Cape Town's urban forest is dire. Increasingly, old trees deemed invasive aliens are being ring-barked and felled on green belts, in parks and in public open spaces. Even private property is not exempt from this approach. Many of the trees that are being destroyed are 80 years old. The trees in these images are on the Classenbush Trail and the Silverhurst Trail. These trees should be exempt from NEMBA regulations given the urban context. The reality is that when these trees are destroyed, it's going to take a minimum of 30 years for any tree to reasonably replace them. More so given our slower growing indigenous species. And the worry is that no new trees or few new trees are being planted in these areas. Francois' point about stump removal is absolutely opposite at this moment. And it's worrying to note that a proposal in the city's integrated development plan, which makes no reference to the urban forest, suggests changing the term referencing plant removal from invasive aliens to aliens. The risk posed by this proposed change to the urban forest and the city's cultural landscape, with its oaks, its plains, its Norfolk pines, chestnuts, and birches, cannot be underestimated. Francois has already spoken to the Raterplaat situation, and this is an area currently targeted for alien removal by biodiversity purism, using fire as the war cry. This will be against residents' wishes, it's against their legitimate expectations, it's against their contractual agreements with the estate, and it ignores their cultural landscape and our cultural landscape. So why urban forests? Again, let the research speak for itself. Trees and other vegetation have important mental and health performance benefits. Local tree canopy cover is positively associated with cooling and other aspects of climate moderation. Public green spaces in proximity to one's home stimulates regular use of these spaces and results in positive impacts on mental, physical, and social health. And remembering that point about social health is critical. Urban forests are gaining recognition as a nature-based solution to climate change and other social environmental issues in cities. Again, social issues are critical, particularly in a city like Cape Town. Urban forests can sequester and store atmospheric carbon, provide shade, help manage stormwater, reduce building energy usage, enhance urban biodiversity, and provide a wide range of environmental, social, and economic values. These values and benefits are crucial for both climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as enhancing urban livability and sustainable development. Some of the benefits of urban trees: cooler temperatures, cleaner air, flood mitigation, improved aesthetics, resulting in increased property values, safer roads, noise buffers, improved health, reduced crime, and support for biodiversity. The global policy position on urban forests is quite clear. And again, let me quote: many cities have introduced urban forest-specific policies, e.g. citywide strategic plans or rule-based regulations, and in some cases integrated them with existing climate and sustainability policy frameworks, because climate change, cities, and urban forests are interconnected topics that are essential to consider in enhancing climate resilience, ecological health, and the livability of a city. Increasingly, the 3-30-300 rule is being applied to a growing number of cities around the world in a bid to mitigate climate impacts and improve sustainability and livability. So what is this 3-30-300 rule? It's a concept developed by urban forester Cecil Koenig and Dake. It talks about having 3 well-established trees in view from every home, school, and place of work. It talks about no less than 30% tree canopy in every neighborhood, and no more than 300 meters to the nearest public green space from every residence. Now, the city's urban design policy on trees, and I think I have the wrong date in here because I think this was approved in 2024, recognizes trees, specifically mature trees, that recognizes the significant value of trees in the urban fabric and the urban landscape because of the amenity value they provide to properties, streets, and neighborhoods. Trees are especially significant, the document says, if they are street trees or form part of an avenue, cluster, or grouping. Trees add a sense of place, they have landmark qualities, and their benefits are many, including climate adaptation and resilience. The policy document talks to the protection of trees, which aligns with numerous city strategies, policies, bylaws, and guidelines. And this is great. This is an incredibly positive document. But the city's proposed municipal planning bylaw, the integrated development plan, and the city's position on densification paint a very different kind of picture. And I'm going to leave it to Greta to unpack the municipal planning bylaws and the impact of all of this on our urban forest. So let's come back to our urban forest policy. And let's remember that we have already lost 5.9% of our urban forest, and we are losing more every day. At least 40% of our remaining 6% is at risk. The urban forest policy intends to grow the urban forest to 10%, again, below what we previously had. And 10% is significantly below the well-researched global trends for urban environments that aim for a minimum of 30% canopy. Again, we live in an anthropogenic biome. We live in a city. We need to remember that. And we need to recognize that we are losing trees at a rapid rate, and we are not planting and we are not replanting sufficient trees. The risks of not having sufficient urban forests to Cape Town are immense. We'll be looking at increased heat and urban heat islands, increased heat-related deaths, increased pollution levels, deteriorating mental, physical, and social health, increased flood risks. Many parts of the Cape Flats are repeatedly at more extreme risk given extreme weather events. It's worth noting that in Lower Takai, the area is reverting to a wetland with the removal of the Upper Takai plantations, and this is impacting urban infrastructure. The bottom line is that with little urban forest, we are going to find ourselves in a situation of decreased livability, decreased sustainability, and decreased resilience. So what are the ways forward? Because we always need to find ways forward, and there are ways forward. And yes, there are challenges, but we need to meet those challenges head on. The city's urban forest policy, I believe, needs to urgently be amended to increase canopy cover from the proposed 10% to 30% with a focused tree planting and maintenance campaign. The city should adopt the 330-300 rule for livability and sustainability of Cape Town and its people. Sugi forests, as we see in the picture to the left, are one way of doing this. The city needs to integrate a stronger urban forest policy with climate resilience, sustainability and livability, health and well-being policies. Development and urban densification critically must be mindful of growing rather than reducing the urban forest. And to that end, the city needs to be consulting with urban foresters and arborists. They know the space. This is the space they work in. As you can see from Francois' presentation, it's a space he's passionate about. And they need to engage locally and internationally to see what others are doing. And the city should also seek special exemption of certain NEMBA-listed species or consider their sterile cultivars, given their adaptation of those trees to our climate and the potential role that they can play in our urban environment. We can look at fruit trees, which can play a dual role as a food source and urban forest in communities. We need to be taking a 100-year view. Unless infected with PSHB, trees should not be removed before new trees have been planted and matured to at least 30 years of age. The city needs to put as much focus on the urban forest as it currently does on biodiversity. The purest language of biodiversity, nativism, needs to be toned down to become more balanced, inclusive, and mindful of the human reality of cities, we need to step away, as Sandparks is doing, from fortress conservation thinking into something that is far more inclusive. Section 24 of the Constitution applies. Everyone has the right to an environment which is not harmful to their health or well-being. UN Sustainability Goal 11 applies. By 2030, provide universal access to safe, inclusive, accessible, green and public spaces, in particular for women and children, older persons, and persons with disabilities. I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Nikki, for your very comprehensive presentation. Let me turn my video on. Well done. And there were some very interesting concepts that you brought up, something that I've been grappling with. And I'm sure all of us in Cape Town, we live in one of the most magnificent places on earth. And all of us feel very strongly about our threatened fynbos biome that is so diverse and so incredibly adapted to only be down here. That it's a conflict that comes up, and you've really brought up some points that for me make a lot of sense, because on a personal level, that's what I've been experiencing. I've been experiencing Cape Town or areas of Cape Town when you perceive luxury and well-being, it's always green and with trees. And that's how people define well-being and wellness and wealth. It's the leafy suburbs. And as the trees are starting to disappear, which I've been feeling it strongly, it feels like we're starting to live in a more hostile city. And that's just an experiential feeling of what seems to be happening. So those are some very interesting points that you brought up that I look forward to more conversations about how we integrate conserving the pristine fynbos biome and also having a livable city, because we're not natural in this environment either, and none of the things that make it livable as humans are natural in the environment. And to be livable and happy, trees play a huge role for my mental well-being and happiness. So that's just my subjective experience. I just want to see, we can maybe take a minute. So Jenny says, Indigenous Afro-Montane trees do not burn easily. They are not evolved to burn, as seen when the fires burned on the garden route. And I was in 2018, 2019, I had to evacuate, and I was very grateful to be in Indigenous forest at that point. And agriculture areas of plantations and areas invaded by alien invasives burned terribly. I think Francois might have spoken a little bit about the Afro-Montane trees and just how quickly they take to grow, etc. But the takeaway that I got earlier is that we definitely need to look at which species we're planting in a city environment. I am going to move on I don't see any particular questions, Nikki. Well done and thank you. Thank you for bringing up some interesting concepts. And I am going to move on now to Paddy Atwell, who is the heritage spokesperson for Parkscape. He's operating in the green spaces of the Valley, and he's a member of Tree Keepers Cape Town. Paddy will introduce concepts of cultural landscapes and the critical importance of green spaces in an era of climate change. Are you ready, Paddy?
Thanks. And I just need to share screen again. So bear with me while I do that.
Sure thing.
Okay. Right, here we go.
Just
Okay,
waiting
thanks
for
very much.
Hold on a second.
Can you see the screen?
Not yet. Hasn't come up yet. Just waiting.
Okay,
Maybe
let's
mine is a
try
bit
again.
slower than anybody else's. Let's see.
Go back again. Let's try again. Did that come up?
Starting to load. Yes.
Okay, great.
Great. Okay. I don't know if you want to put it in presenter view or if you're happy
Yeah,
with your...
there we go. It should be in presenter view now, is it? Okay, where we go. Look, there was a time when trees filled the Constanța Tokai Valley, and we still have trees, but not as many as before. Meanwhile, most of Cape Town, as we've been discussing, has relatively few trees, and all of this points to the value of the green heritage of Constanța Tokai. So I will be using Constanța Tokai as an example of what I'll be talking about on the issue of cultural landscapes. And this green heritage is important not only for the locals, but also for people from across the city who seek out shade, beauty, and sense of place of the valley. The green heritage is central to the cultural landscape of the valley. So what I'll be talking about, let me change next. I'll be talking to basically providing an introduction to the concepts of cultural landscapes. I'll then look at how this applies in Constanța Tokai, some comments on legal protection, and then close with looking at some future prospects. Okay, cultural landscapes. Here I defer to UNESCO and the World Heritage Convention, who describe cultural landscapes as the combined works of nature and humankind. Then what I particularly like about this definition, it does not view nature and culture as binary opposites. Significant landscapes combine the works of nature and humankind to create places of exceptional beauty and character with a strong sense of place. Okay, so the World Heritage Convention provides three basic definitions of cultural landscapes or types of cultural landscapes. The first is a landscape designed and created intentionally by people. And the second is a continuing landscape. We see Western Cape canola fields in the background. I used to go out to Greyton a lot, where I own property, and I always enjoyed looking at the fields of wheat and canola and so on. It's extremely beautiful part of the Western Cape. Thirdly, we look at natural features with a strong cultural association. Just some examples. First of all, Kirstenbosch, fantastic example of a designed landscape and a great showpiece for the city and for our indigenous vegetation in particular. Secondly, a continuing landscape. This is a picture of Buitenverwachting taken in 2014. I'll come back to this picture, but a continuing landscape is one that's constantly evolving. And in the case of the of Constanța Valley, we have many examples of scenes of great beauty and sense of place. Thirdly, here's an example of natural features with a strong cultural association. I'm a frequent visitor to the Cederberg in the Stadsel Cave complex. People will remember this particular sand painting, which shows shamans. Those are figures on the left dressed in karossa, apparently drawing energy from elephants. But that whole complex of caves and overhangs is the spiritual place, and I'm frequently attracted to that and just spending time there. Okay, so now we come to Constanța. Really, Constanța here is, we find the Constanțaberg basically embracing the whole valley as a central point. Apparently, in the olden days, the early Dutch cartographers called the Constanțaberg the Prince Castile because they thought it looked like a castle, apparently named after the Prince William of Orange, which also explains the naming of the Orange Kloof. And so we go. And then along comes this character called Fabio Todeschini, Professor Fabio Todeschini. He was the director of the School of Architecture and Planning at UCT, and he was completely besotted by Constanța, but also by the winelands in general. And he spent about 30 years studying and reporting on the Constanța Valley in particular for various reasons. Now, and he basically wrote what are now the baseline studies when you're looking at the issue of the cultural landscape in this particular valley. In about 1990, the local council of of Constantia commissioned Todeschini and Vivian Jaffa to study the built environment of the valley for a report completed in 1991. And they argued that you can't look at the built environment in isolation. It only makes true sense if you look at its context, which is the landscape in general and how the buildings fit into that. The report included a diagram which they called cultural landscape. And this was really possibly the first diagram that illustrated the point. So in it, amongst other things, you had the mountain, for example, in the background. The dark areas were forests. The yellow areas were your wine farms, and it was interlaced by various things. The following year, the local council also commissioned MLH and architects and planners to produce a local area growth management and development plan for the valley, which they completed in July 1992. And they based the report largely on the 1991 study. Todeschini was a member of the team. The council endorsed the plan, which remains a baseline study for planning purposes. And the study also included a diagram which is entitled The Desired Future Character of the Valley. We're talking about 30 years ago, so this is what they saw as the desired future of the valley where we are now, 30 years later. The report sought to conserve the cultural landscape of the valley, including forests, which you'll see in the green areas, wine farms in yellow, riverine corridors, scenic routes, and conservation-worthy complexes and buildings. The diagram also shows quite interesting features. I don't have my cursor comes up on the screen here, but the diagram also shows how the early farms fan out from the base of the mountain along various axes. Topography played a role, but design in those days was also deliberate. Circling Groot Constantia here, for example. If you follow a line down the main avenue at Groot Constantia through the front door of the homestead and out the back, you'll be looking at the peak of the Constantiaberg. So the placement of Groot Constantia was very deliberate. So it was almost designed. There's an axis which goes from the homestead through to the peak. Then, and other farms followed the same. You'll see Tokai Road providing the same sort of thing. So there was a design to the landscape which contributed to the overall way that it ended up. Okay, so this report described how to read this landscape. It said the Constantia Tokai Valley represented, quote, an irreplaceable national asset of great historical, cultural, productive, and aesthetic significance. And then the report dealt at some length with various aspects of the key elements of the valley, the framework of the element, provides a way of understanding or reading how this valley works. Number one was the wilderness areas of the high and remote mountains. Then the forest as they existed at the time and farmlands. Then we have the riverine open space network and associated agricultural smallholdings. Many of those smallholdings are now gone. The landscape of historical and cultural buildings, places, views, and landmarks. The route network linking parts of the valley. And social foci, that's where people would gather. Our green belts are an example. So that's really the framework of the valley and how to understand it. Then the report is quite substantial, but it boils down to two basic qualities of the valley, and these they defined as ruralness and the word capeness, which has been used by heritage practitioners for quite a number of years. Ruralness, you can read that, but examples include forestry, fallow land, watercourses, open countryside, related settlements, buildings, roads, expressing a local vernacular. So ruralness was seen as a key quality of the valley. The next one is a particular word called capeness, which is the distinctive quality derived from the manner in which extensive wilderness areas, rural activities, and historically modified environments are arranged with one another and then composed and situated on the majestic, often cloud-capped and wind-buffeted landscapes of the Cape. What they were trying to get across is there's something special in the identity of the Cape, especially in our winelands, but there's a quality which the locals enjoy and love and which attracts visitors and tourists from around the world. And this is something that is very, very special to Cape Town, and especially this valley, which is something that should be treasured and preserved. This picture of Buitenverwachting captures all of that. First of all, we have the majestic Constantiaberg in the background, cloud covered and wind buffeted. At that time, we had forests running along the valley wall. We have other forests and trees, and we have this wine farm, this wonderful wine farm embedded in this overall scene. And all of this comes together to provide a cultural landscape of incredible international significance. Another picture in the same valley, of course, is Groot Constantia. And as I mentioned, you don't often see it if you're there, but if you think about it, the whole positioning of Groot Constantia was designed along the topography, but also along a certain axis, which helped to frame the way the whole valley comes together. So these this is an area of certainly of international significance. Okay, legal protection for landscapes. This is a matter of discussion amongst heritage practitioners. My view, looking at the legislation, it says it does protect landscapes. The object of the Act is to protect the national estate. And if you look there, Section 2D at the bottom, it includes landscapes and natural features of cultural significance. Okay, now what the Act does, it provides criteria for assessing cultural significance. I won't go through all these in great depth. You can see them there. Historical value, obviously, but you must remember that cultural significance is not limited to history. It's a lot more than that. And it's very much about living and value, how cultural resources are valued presently. Obviously, aesthetic value is important, certainly as far as the valley is concerned. The one I do want to look at is social value. Social value refers to the contribution of a resource like a landscape to a community's sense of place. And this value is important. It considers the memories and associations of ordinary people, often overlooked. This is not an academic abstraction, but it's very much part of a living heritage. So social value is something that's overlooked, and it applies to all of us who love these sorts of landscapes. And what's powerful about the Act is that it does actually acknowledge the value of social value. Slavery at the bottom there represents the dark side of the story of the valley. And more recently, evictions in terms of the Group Areas Act represent another dark side to this story. And it is encouraging now to see the extent to which ancestors of slaves and those affected by group areas are now claiming their place in the cultural landscape of the valley. Right. So Section 30 of the Act requires heritage authorities to grade heritage resources according to criteria that we've seen already, provided for assessing cultural significance. And local authorities, for example, can apply grade 3 gradings to heritage resources where grade 3A covers heritage resources of high significance requiring maximum protection. When they apply these, and the gradings are color-coded, so when you apply it to a map, this is what it looks like. This is the Rondebosch area, Rondebosch Common, sort of purple color, which indicates a heritage resource of national significance. But you can see, and the burgundy sort of colors are grade 3A sites which require maximum protection. So we hop across to the Constantia Valley, and we find that all except one of the Constantia greenbelts are graded as 3A cultural landscapes. Now, it's interesting to look at the register itself, and it talks about it talks about the cultural landscape. Okay, it's a grade 3A cultural landscape. Grading notes. It says component of a highly significant cultural landscape. You look down further, it says statement of significance, part of the Constantia cultural landscape. So that's great, big tick to the city. It actually acknowledges that there is such a thing as the Constantia cultural landscape. The question is, what does that mean in terms of policy? Okay.
Paddy, I'm just going to say that we are a little bit pressed for time.
Okay, I'll move to the end there. I just wanted to point out, first of all, the cultural heritage strategy for the city includes cultural landscapes and acknowledging it. And the action policy will be that the city will ensure that the cultural landscape is protected and managed as an integral part of the development of the city, of development planning. And I think we have good reason to be skeptical about that. I'm going to finish then. Sorry, my computer won't go down. Okay, I'm going to go back to the picture that Nikki, in conclusion, that Nikki had, showing the concentrations of green chlorophyll over the city. You'll see Newlands Forest and so on. And essentially, the Sentinel-2 satellite scans the Earth every 10 days or so. It was originally designed to monitor forests and agricultural areas. It's also useful for looking at the city. And as Nikki pointed out, the city has found that the urban forest only covers about 6% of Cape Town and suggests that we should aim for 10%. And this is obviously hopelessly inadequate. But for most of Cape Town, it's a giant heat island. And this holds dire consequences given global warming and climate change, and draws attention once again to the green heritage of Constantia Valley, and it's how important it is to provide a green shaded resource for people from across the city for the foreseeable future. I'll close at that point.
Thank you so much, Paddy. And let me turn my camera on. I've really been wondering, as there's this development boom, as everybody's migrating, immigrating, and semigrating to Cape Town. And I can really feel a loss of the cultural landscape. It seems to be becoming Johannesburg clusters and Dubai by the sea. And yeah, I'm really glad to hear that there is a aesthetic and heritage culture aspect that should be looked at, but I'm just wondering if our rate of growth is allowing for those considerations when there is so much pressure with everything else. And I would certainly hope so. Are there any questions? I don't see any in the chat. So I'm going to say, Greta, are you ready for us?
Hi, Anna. Yes, I am ready.
Great. Okay, over to you. And just to introduce you, this is Greta Pegram. Greta specializes in spatial planning and environmental law, assisting with urban planning and land use applications, ensuring compliance with the relevant statutes. Her advocacy is dedicated to supporting sustainability by addressing legal challenges and finding solutions to promote the protection of rights. Now, I only learnt that this webinar was quite well timed and stumbled into the issue of these municipal planning bylaws. And I'm very fascinated to learn more. Greta, I believe that there's currently an open commenting process. And yeah, really, really excited to learn more from you.
Thank you. Is my
you.
screen... do I need to put my video on, or?
You don't have to, but I can't see your screen.
There we go.
There we go. That's
There
even
I am.
better. Much better.
Okay, cool. All right, let me just get my presentation up. All right. Can everybody hear me?
I can't see your presentation yet. Sometimes it seems like with all the other speakers, we needed to try again. So I'll give you the go ahead when I can see it. Maybe stop sharing and share again. Let's just give it another go.
Sorry about this. Let me just do that.
It happens every time.
Is it coming on now?
Nope. Are you, is it showing on your screen?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And have you selected share in Zoom or are you still in PowerPoint?
Oh gosh, I'm probably still in PowerPoint.
All good.
Um,
Okay, so
sorry, can you just
bear with us,
tell me how
everybody.
to?
Your
Oh, there we go. There we go. Hang on.
tech support.
Um,
So within the Zoom frame, we need to just go to, there we go. Excellent. It's coming up. And if you want to do presenter view in this,
there we go. It should
perfect.
be up now.
Yes, we've got you.
Okay. Well, I hope that gave everybody a little break. Stretch of legs.
And
Thanks for your patience. All right. It's wonderful to be part of this webinar, Anna, and thank you for inviting me and to participate with all of you on the issue of trees, biodiversity, and for my part, to discuss the role of planning law in our city. There are not many places on Earth, in fact, it is unique, where a city metropole encircles a national park, which is also a global biodiversity hotspot, is conserved and internationally valued as a World Heritage Site. We have intact environmental systems, green infrastructure, nature corridors. Yes, we have our problems too, but we have so much in our natural environment that provide green arteries, green lungs within our urban areas. A point that has been made before is that we do not need to spend millions to recreate or to replace collapsed ecosystems, but we do need to have a robust legislative system, enforcement of policy, and an accountable city to ensure that it does. We also need to start thinking seriously about the city's climate resilience and heat traps. Ecological services and green infrastructure consists of rivers, trees, mature tree canopy, wetlands, rivers, fynbos, linkages of open space. Some of the ecological...
sorry, I just
Yes.
want to ask you, are you changing your screen or are we still looking at the first slide?
Sorry, guys, this is going to not be as entertaining as my previous
No, sorry, I just wanted to check.
colleagues.
I won't interrupt
No.
you again.
Okay, no problem. All right, so some of these ecological and green infrastructure starts on private land and then traverses through public city-owned land via public open space and greenbelt. So a lot of these places start in private, some of the rivers, etc. But they all traverse through the public open space and the greenbelts. Public open space and greenbelts are held in trust by the city for the current citizens and for future generations of Cape Town. The green infrastructure is mostly flanked by private land and associated activities, and so it impacts. These are sensitive environments. The distinction between private and public land is important in terms of the rule of law and to understand the problems with enforcement. My presentation will focus on some commentary around public open space, the regulatory system. I'll spend just a few minutes discussing the local bylaws, and I'll mention some of the problems, public versus private, with some examples. And then I will conclude with some requirements in terms of seeking solutions. The open space are spaces for everyone, all of Cape Town citizens, current and future. Residents come from all over Cape Town, the Cape Flats and further afield, to enjoy the tree-canopied connection with nature, the wetlands, the fynbos, the rehabilitation of urban areas, all of it. People drive up, take a taxi, hike up to Cecilia Forest, cross over into the mountain or onto the greenbelts. To many, it is a family highlight to spend the morning and the day amongst the greenbelts and in nature. But there is more to it. The public open space, the nature corridors, including gardens. Think of the Sunbird project to provide, through residents planting fynbos gardens, to make a viable corridor for the endemic birds to make their way across the city in search of food. Pockets of land with unique populations of flowers are all vital part of the city's ability to be sustainable. To start off, it's important to know the governing legislation that impacts our property, our neighborhoods, and our city in relation to trees and biodiversity. This is the regulatory system. These 4 documents in front of you together are where we find the law that governs the city's legal landscape in this regard. The IDP, the Integrated Development Plan, is a 5-year plan from the period of 2022 to 2027 that is to be the city of hope for all. The IDP is a measurable, objective-based capital and financial targeting plan. It states that in respect of public spaces, streets, and waterways, states the following: recognizing the value, we are prioritizing a healthy and sustainable environment through environmental and biodiversity management and evidence-based city health, clean and healthy waterways and beaches. And it goes on. The third document in this row is the MSDF, which is the Municipal Spatial Development Plan, with local district plans for all the areas throughout the city. It's a forward visionary setting plan that also has objectives and implementation criteria with a view to what we want our urban spaces to look like in 10 years' time. So you can consider this the route map of where we want to be in the future. The last document is the Municipal Planning Bylaw. It has lots of my scribbles on it, as this is the amendment bylaw that is currently published for comments. Lots and lots of comments. If you haven't read it yet, a spoiler alert. The public open spaces that are our green belts, zoned OS2 and OS3, have had the environmental conservation, the environmental right of use, stricken from green belts. Imagine environmental conservation stricken from the green belts. It's an unfathomable concept, and it must be rectified. The Constitution is the highest law in our country, and it provides the basis for all our law. The Bill of Rights within the Constitution, and it was mentioned earlier today, gives us the environmental right. So everyone has the right to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being, and to have the environment protected for the benefit of present and future generations, to prevent pollution and ecological degradation, to promote conservation, and to secure ecological sustainable development. The Constitution also has listed the competency with respect to lawmaking. So what laws can the local authority, the municipality, the city make with the following functional areas? And these are the ones that they are able to draft legislation according to. So there is the municipal plan, the municipal planning, building regulations, stormwater management, municipal parks and recreation, and public places. Notice that the city has made bylaws in just about all of these functional areas. The Municipal Planning Bylaw, which is being revised now, the stormwater management, but the last 2 are the ones that I would like to focus on next: municipal parks and public places. All right, so we are all on board. The city is given its functional areas, and all its actions must be governed in law, and it all starts with the Constitution. So to focus on trees and biodiversity, the following 3 statutes are fundamental to the issue of trees. And as an example, the recent felling by a private person in a public open space. Nikki had a photograph of the earth in and the public open space. So these are the functional areas of the city: public parks bylaw, the tree management policy, and streets, public places, and the prevention of noise nuisances. And I'm going to highlight some of the legal compliance clauses within them. So for public parks bylaw, Section 10, it's trees and public parks. And just so that you are assured, the definition of a public park includes public open space. It states that no person other than an authorized official shall plant, prune a tree or a shrub, or in any way cut down a tree or a shrub in a public park, or remove it therefrom, except with written permission of the Director of City Parks. Section 11 also says no person shall plant, pull out, pick, damage, or remove any plant, grass, shrub, bulbs, vegetation, or flower. There are also provisions for water. And Section 18 provides the offences and the penalties, and offences are with regard to the Criminal Act. The Public Parks Bylaw states with Section 10 that trees in public parks, hang on, we've already done that. Sorry. Yes, I thought something was wrong. Section 18 continues, and it says any person who contravenes or fails to comply with a notice is guilty of an offence and is liable for a fine or imprisonment for a period of not exceeding 6 months, or to both such fine and imprisonment. Section 2, in addition to imposing a fine or imprisonment, a court may order to have in addition remedy the harm that's been caused, or to pay damages of the harm that's caused. So the tree management policy, the second statute, this concerns and means the protection and maintenance of the existing tree asset base in the city. It has policy directives, and Section 7.2 with regards to tree pruning and removal. The management of trees in the city provides that all trees are valuable, and this is an important statement. No person may prune or remove a tree planted on city land without prior authority, and no tree located on public open space or road reserves is to be removed unless it's a threat to human life or property, or if the tree has died. The city, in fact, may refuse to prune or remove when there's an application for it based on the fact that the view is being obstructed. The Streets, Public Places and Prevention of Noise Nuisances 2007, in Section 9, states that no person other than a duly authorized city official shall, or in any way, cut down a tree or a shrub in a public road or remove it, except with the written permission of the city. May not damage a tree in a public road, and Section 22 provides that the city may act and recover its costs. Failure to comply shall be guilty of an offence which triggers the Criminal Act, and Section 22A are the enforcement powers providing directives. So that gives you an outline of the powers of the city and the enforceable legal means for protection. But let's step back and let's look at what the problems are. To run through these problems, I'd like to highlight that this presentation's issues apply either on private land or on public land. So we have inappropriate development on private land. We have damage to public open space, green infrastructure on public land. We have loss of biodiversity and loss of uniqueness in both. We have the disconnect with city policies, plans, and land use applications. The need for citywide urban greening is massive throughout the city. And also we have now the Municipal Planning Bylaw Amendments 2024. So let's have a discussion around inappropriate development and what are those? Well, those are the ones, remember we're talking about private land at this time, that deviate from the district plan and the development management scheme that's held within the planning bylaw. Developments that by inappropriate developments are those that by intensity, by scale, and by the bulk mass replace all greenery. In scale, they are the hardened surfaces that cover the majority of those urban and are intensively concrete and hardened. This is a typical scheme of development that is prevalent in Constantia and does not require any land use applications, and therefore there is no consultation or public participation with regards to neighbours or the neighbourhood. Typically, the hardened surfaces are greater than 60% and often sit at 70%, where the limit, in fact, is actually 30% for urban that are greater than 2,000 square meters, or it is 40% for urban between 1,000 and 2,000 square meters. Due to the maximization of building coverages, the patios and the swimming pools, and notice there are 3, 1 for each, have to be built within the 6-meter boundary line. The new amendment now proposes to allow for 4 and even more. There is simply no space for trees. The mature trees are felled, the primary dwellings are demolished, and they're all part of the building plan, the building plans which don't require notification of neighbours. There are no features that retain the unique character. Design is on an inappropriate grid-based cluster design. It's lacking in capeness, in settlement design, and there's a lack of placemaking urban design. There is imminent and the promotion of privacy issues because they are all double-story. And typically, there is no green design within them. There is no energy efficiency or even water resource appropriate considerations, let alone for the trees and the mature trees that once existed. So now let's contrast this with the criteria that is within the spatial development framework. For Constantia, it says that this is a distinctive area of rural, green, and lower intensity suburban capeness. It requires to maintain and enhance the unique sense of place and the character of these valleys. And Constantia is to be recognized that it is not a city growth area. It goes on. In order to retain the unique and internationally desirable character areas and the landscape qualities, in Constantia, specific additional development-related recommendations should apply. And these include those maximum hardened surfaces we spoke about, which include the roofs and patios. This is in order to ensure, enhance, and retain capeness, the gardens, the mature trees, the canopy, and cultural landscape heritage. It does not get irreversibly replaced by buildings and hardened surfaces, which is what was referred to as coverage. Here are some examples of inappropriate developments that seem now to be the norm and are taking place. This is an earth that has already been sectional, it has become a sectional title. The first to go are the mature trees. The roots are bulldozed out, the trees are felled, and the primary dwelling is about to be demolished as well. What is left are the sectional title buildings. They're replaced by building massing of dwellings, the high walls, security, and no trees. These are before and after images, photographs of the trees that are replaced by the maximized hardened coverage surfaces and the building massing that I referred to. There is an obvious disconnect between the spatial development framework and the district plans and what's happening in practice. The route map is not being followed, and we could land up on the wrong destination where we want to be. In terms of the spatial development framework and the National Law of Spatial Planning, which is known as SPLUMA, the SDF's district plans have the force of law, and their status provides that an MPT, that's a Municipal Planning Tribunal, or any other authority required or mandated to make a land use development decision may not make a decision that is inconsistent with the same plan. And Section 22 states that any departures, applications from the NSDF are only permissible under site-specific circumstances that justify a departure. So the question is, what site-specific justified circumstances justify not adhering to all the examples that I have just shown you? In conclusion, the City of Cape Town acknowledges that all trees are valuable and that the city must be sustainable and has a green infrastructure program. It has environmental strategy. But are the provisions in the strategy and the program enforceable? The planning bylaw amendments have removed environmental conservation from public open spaces. And it was hoped that after the recent tree felling, that there would actually be the reverse, a tightening up, greater certainty in the bylaw. But it has only been proposed, the city has only proposed in the new amendment bylaw for provision of trees that are protected by the Forestry Act, which is not under city jurisdiction, but is rather the Department of Environment. The city will enforce those trees, those are protected trees and champion trees under the Forestry Act protection. No other provision for protection of green infrastructure and mature trees has been provided. I've taken you through the city's legal landscape and the key statutes that govern trees and biodiversity within planning law. The amendment bylaw is published for comment. The comment period ends on the 25th of October of this month. People, Residents need to scrutinize these changes and make sure that the law is getting clearer, stronger, and more implementable in terms of the services that the ecology and the green infrastructure provides us through conservation and protection measures, and that is not getting weaker. The herbicides and pesticides are not, that we should make sure that the herbicides and pesticides are not entering our waterways and causing harm to the ecology and humans. Environmental conservation must not be stricken from public open space zonings. The endemic orange-breasted sunbird, which people from all over the world come to see, birding is a growing interest and a source of tourism economy to the city, so that the sunbirds are able to traverse the city to find food and habitat to flourish in this unique city of ours. The city must enforce its policies and draft enforceable environmental strategies. It must improve transparency in matters when things go wrong. It must include community-based organizations. The gaps and the disconnect between the MSDF district plans need to be addressed in the planning bylaw. Protection of green infrastructure needs to be enforceable. There needs to be, the bottom line is there needs to be greater certainty in law and greater certainty in implementing the law. This is, after all, how the city becomes a sustainable city and keeps its uniqueness. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Greta. How do we get involved? How do people in their suburbs, how do we get the information to people in their suburbs for what the laws are and for what is enforceable? So many people in areas all over Cape Town are kind of helpless and hopeless because they don't understand really what their rights are and how to object, or what potential penalties or implications there are.
Yes, it's a lack of knowledge. I agree with you. A lack of awareness, a lack of being connected, and you know why that is. I don't think we should focus on that, but I think we should focus on actually, for example, this webinar is drawing people together. It's getting the word out, and we should grow from here. We should start spreading the word. I am busy drafting my community called the Concerned Residents of Constantia. They felt completely awash as how they can contribute, how they could understand the document. And I'm writing a fairly shortened version from a resident's perspective of what the bylaw looks like. And I could make that available. But the thing is to connect with your ratepayers associations, connect to community-based organizations, to get a bigger voice and to collaborate together, and get the word out and definitely get comments in by the 25th of October, no matter what. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it would be great if you could share your summary and your write-up that I suppose is putting it into more less legalese and more human and accessible understanding. Somebody had a really good point, which is something that I'm also aware of, is how do we balance these legal provisions or the greening with the influx of people and the population growth to find room to house the future populations of Cape Town. And one of the things that's coming up for me, obviously I'm not a presenter, is we only realize the value of things when they're gone.
Yeah.
And I think my just call would be an acceleration of those involved in planning to really prioritize how we balance retaining the value. You started off by saying how unique Cape Town is, that we have this magnificent city in this very unique placement in this incredibly rare biome, and that's what makes Cape Town valuable. And how do we maintain the value of Cape Town while buckling essentially under the pressure of growth? So lots
Yes.
to figure out.
Yes. Look, from reading the planning bylaw in its current condition, it needs to be brought in balance. I mean, understandably, the city is under a lot of pressure. We have limited resources, including financial. We have got to tackle the issue of upgrading the informals. It's vitally important, and there's a whole lot of moving parts in this. But if we undermine the very basis, which is the environmental sustainability, the ecological services that are provided to the city, we are definitely not going to get to our future state that we desire to be, where all these moving parts are to somewhat extent in balance. We've got to start making sure that the environment is secure, our resources and our ecological resources are secure, and figure the rest out from there.
My understanding is that securing the environment is the foundation. It actually serves as the foundation for growth, because if it's not, that is what is sustaining the growth, and we will see collapse, and we will see all of these disastrous events unfold, which will ultimately be more costly.
Exactly.
That's just okay.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, Greta. I really, really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're very busy with the comment. I would really love to share it. And then Councillor Franklin has shared that there's a public meeting on municipal planning bylaws with the option for public participation in Cape Town Civic Centre Council Chambers, Tuesday, the 8th of October, from 6 to 8 p.m. So let's go. Let's go, everybody. Let's get in there. Okay. Thanks.
Yes, if I could just
Yes.
add, the city does want people to register the fact that they will be attending. And if I can just give you that email address, just pop an email to the city. It is lums at capetown.gov.za.
Is that LUNS?
LUM for mother, S, LUMS,
Gov.
at
In the
capetown.gov.za.
chat. Alrighty.
Yes. There's also an online meeting for the 10th of October. And again, just to pop the city an email saying that you would like to attend the online as well. I think it's also the same time that Councillor Carolyn mentioned, 6 to 8 or something.
Thank you so much. Okay, now we are going to move on to Debbie Muir. We have, like I said, we have a spectrum of speakers presenting a very broad range of issues. I think it would be impossible to cover everything to do with trees in 2.5 hours. We might need to spend a month on the issue. And one of my questions, as I've started to investigate or just follow my curiosity, is what are the actual laws around aliens? And I went to a lecture not so long ago on bees, and I learned that one of the greatest threats to our bees is not necessarily pesticides, which is our core focus as UnPoison, but the loss of their food. And that just sparked some curiosity in me. And so I have asked Debbie Muir to present on her presentation is Gums and Bees and Other Sticky Matters. I always love hearing from Debbie. Debbie is the Biodiversity Officer Control of DFFE. She was the former Deputy Director of Environmental Affairs. Debbie has more than 20 years of experience in environmental management, biodiversity conservation, and in the last 8 years, she's been focused on pesticides, which is where we have segued. And it would be very good just to hear from a government department with regards to some of the laws around aliens. So thank you so much for joining, Debbie, with your very busy schedule. Over to you.
Oh, let me just put my sound on. Can everybody see my screen?
Indeed.
Oh, great. Okay, so I'm going to, I got the nice sticky matter of gums and bees. So I'm going to talk about gums and bees. How do I get to the next slide? Oh, there you go. So basically, I'm going to just give you a background on the big conundrum. How does it all fit together? A little bit of the eucalyptus species and the law. So how many, where, whatever, and where do the bees fit in with the gums? Are all aliens bad? That's a question that's normally asked. How does green urban spaces and densification fit into the whole picture? And then some concluding remarks. So now let's go to this nice, wonderful little mind map of mine here. So this is the big picture. So when we're talking about anything regarding invasive species, control, gums, bees, we have to look at our main sort of targets that we have to comply to, which is everything from the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration and the 2030 Agenda, which is the Sustainable Development Goals. So the ones that are relevant to us and the talk today are SDG 11, which is cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And linked to that is the Rio Declaration Principle 1, which also talks about sustainable cities and settlements, and also linked to that is the the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework Target 12, which looks at resilience and green urban spaces and how municipalities can look at linking green urban spaces together. And obviously also all of those are linked together, and that is obviously one of the SDGs. And then we have SDG 13, which is action to combat climate change and its impacts, which is linked to SDG 11 and also linked all along. I couldn't put all the arrows in, otherwise I would have been really busy. And that's also linked to the GBF target 8, which is climate change, which then also links to the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So you can see that even if we just stay on the left-hand side, everything is linked together. And then if you're looking at ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns, it's linked to the Rio Declaration Principles 4 and 8. And it's also then linked to targets 2, 3, 6, and 7B of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is target 2, it's restore biodiversity. Target 3 is conserve biodiversity. Target 6 is remove alien invasive species, and the target there is to ensure that alien invasive species are removed by 50% by the year 2030. Now that's a big amount. If you think about the amount of invasive species in the world, if you just look at the amount of invasive species in South Africa, there is no ways that we are going to get to that target of removing invasive alien species by 50%. But we might reach that target if we integrate with more sustainable options, which you link then to SDG 15, which is protect, restore, promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems and sustainable management of forests and combat desertification, halt and reverse land degradation, etc., etc. So these are all linked together. So there you're also then looking at that then shoots off to the United Nations Convention on combating desertification and the land degradation neutrality. Now that's not really relevant to an urban environment, but it is in a way when you're looking at sort of carbon sequestration and planting trees, and also that then links to the climate smart framework, where the target is under target 10, where you have to plant 10 billion trees by 2030, which is kind of a lot of trees. And that also then links to the Paris Agreement again and the UNFCCC. So you can see on this sort of mind map that everything is linked together. So so at a global stage, it's all linked together. Now, how do we take this sort of mind map and bring it down to how does this work with bees? So if you look at bees, gums and bees, there's 85 eucalyptus species present in South Africa, but there's only 6 that are invasive in South Africa. So that means that there's only 7% of the eucalyptus species that are actually regulated, which means they are on the alien and invasive species lists. Now, out of those 6 that are regulated, in other words, on the alien and invasive species lists under NEMBA, only 3.5% of those are used by the honey industry, the industry that uses the eucalyptus trees for honey. And though the three main species are the sugar gum, Eucalyptus cladocalis, Eucalyptus leymanii, and Eucalyptus camaldulensis. Now, out of those three species, sugar gum, cladocalis, produces 2/3 of the honey production. So one species gives you 2/3 of the honey production. So that's that. Obviously, then you look at that and you think, well, that's kind of an important species. And then leymanii and camaldulensis together only produce 1/5 of the honey. So looking at that mind map, you would probably think that the most important species then for the honey industry would be Eucalyptus cladocalis. So then we go down to the next one and we say, okay, well, only 7%. So it's not that bad. Okay. So then we look at what are the major issues. So Eucalyptus cladocalis is the major nectar source. After discussions between the honey industry and the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, it was decided that Eucalyptus cladocalis will be retained. So it will be on the invasive species list, but as a category 2 species, which means it has a conditional retainment, which means, excuse me, just give me a sec.
While you're having your water, Debbie, I wanted to ask you,
Yes.
is the botanical name of the eucalyptus, is that your classic blue gum? What tree are we talking about exactly?
Okay, you are talking about, so Eucalyptus cladocalis is sugar gum. Eucalyptus camaldulensis is red river gum.
Okay.
And Eucalyptus leymanii is, I forget Eucalyptus leymanii now, is spider gum. So those three species are the ones that are used by the honey industry. So now we look at the sugar gum. So it gives you most of the nectar. It's retained, but the problem is you cannot plant it in a sensitive area. So what is a sensitive area? A sensitive area is a wetland, a river, a dam, a estuary, anywhere where it is sensitive. And it is listed under the NEMBA regulations exactly what a sensitive area is. So the sugar gums in the sensitive areas are not allowed. So they must come out of the sensitive areas, but you can apply. So if you want to keep your sugar gums, sorry, I keep saying Eucalyptus cladocalis, your sugar gums, all you need to do is you need to apply for a permit under category 2 through the Alien Invasive Species Permits regulations, and you can then keep your sugar gum if you want to use it for honey. But this is the conditions. If your sugar gum gets out of where you have planted them and it becomes invasive and it spreads, any damage that sugar gum causes in any sensitive areas downstream, etc., will be the full responsibility of the permit holder upstream. So in other words, if you don't ensure that your sugar gum does not invade downstream from where you've planted it for honey or whatever, you will be held liable for any damages downstream. Okay. Now, Eucalyptus leymanii, spider gum, that is the most destructive one. So that one was an unconditional removal. So that species you cannot keep. You will not be able to get a permit for it. That one has to be removed. And Eucalyptus camaldulensis, that one is also a category 1B species, but a category 1B species does not necessarily mean you have to remove it. You can have a management plan for it. So my next question then would be to, hypothetically, obviously, because I'm not speaking to the honey industry directly now, do you have species management plans for your eucalyptus or for your gum species on your properties? Because you need a species management plan or what otherwise known as a control eradication management plan under Section 67(1) of the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act. So then also the biggest concern then for the honey industry is that 50% of the honey that's produced in South Africa comes from the gums. So the gums then would mean that probably if you're looking at the 2/3 would be then most of your honey. So 2/3 of that 50% will be coming from the sugar gum. But then there has been a conditional retainment given for the sugar gum, that a permit will be given for sugar gums for the honey industry. Okay, so now here's a list of gums you can keep and gums that must go. So, so if the gums are, you can keep them if they are in the Nama Karoo, the succulent Karoo, or desert biomes, and this is including the 6 species. Okay. So even if it's the 6 invasive species, if they are in those if they are in those 3 biomes, you can keep them. If they are in cultivated land, at least 50 meters away from untransformed or natural land, you can keep them. Within 50 meters from a main house on a farm. That means that they are landscape species. They are not riparian species. That means that they are not in a riparian zone. They're not in a river. They're not in an estuary, etc. They're on the landscape. In other words, they don't they probably will not have a risk to the groundwater or the surface water. So the mitigation, so you are mitigating the risk that they will be able to suck up all the water in the groundwater table, for instance. In urban areas, gums within, and now this is important, you can keep a gum if the trunk diameter is over 400 millimeters and the height is over 1,000 millimeters. So that means the circumference of the trunk must be 400 millimeters and it must be over 1 meter tall. Then you can keep it. And gums in existing formal plantations, that doesn't really bear true for urban, but true. But the gums that must go, those that are in riparian areas within 32 meters of the edge of a river, lake, dam, wetland, estuary, or within the 1 in 100-year flood line, whichever is greater. Okay, that means that sometimes the 1 in 100-year flood line is closer than the edge of a river or dam or wetland. So then you know, the 32 meters from the edge of the river, whatever. So whichever one is greater, that is the one that will be taken. And gums growing in protected areas must go. So the protected areas are declared national parks, provincial reserves, mountain catchment areas, private nature reserves, and conservation areas. And then here's another one that's very important: discretion for non-invading species. Okay, when other means, which means the gums that are used for shade in parking lots, the gums that are used for windrows, etc. You know, if you want to plant a bunch of gums down your sort of your driveway, etc., those you need a permit for, a Category 2 permit. Okay, so this is what gums do. So invasive species, this is the risks that invasive species pose. So on the top left-hand on the top left-hand side, every one of those 56 structures that burned was surrounded by invasive plants. Though that was the fires that burnt all the houses that on Lion's Head. So if you are surrounded by a fire-prone species, like an invasive species, that is grown, that is mostly invaded the fynbos, as you can see in most of these pictures, the risk of fire is very, very high. You can see in the bottom left-hand side corner, those were pine trees, gum trees, and some wattles and ukes that burnt in the 2017 Knysna fires. The top right-hand picture, and all these photos were accredited to a colleague of mine, ex-colleague of mine, that allowed me to use his photos for this presentation. That was part of the Knysna fire, where it just burnt out the entire car, which is quite shocking. And then this house in Glencairn did not burn only because the wind direction changed, and those flames were 100 meters high. And what was burning there was also a fire-prone species called Acacia cyclops. So you really need to think, take a step back and think. Invasive alien species, what are their risks, and do I really want to plant these things? Okay, so what are the risks? So
I want to say, Debbie, unfortunately, we've got a few minutes left because we're running over time.
Okay, that's fine. I'll go quicker. I don't have that many slides left. Okay, so they outcompete and displace. I've told you about fire already. But what the problem is in fynbos is that fynbos is already a fire-prone system, and now we add in more fire species. So it burns hotter. So we're actually killing all the fynbos geophytes in that system. And we ending up with sterile hotspots within the fynbos biome, which is really bad. We have severely impacting water resources, reducing agricultural capacity of land. There's no good versus bad alien invasive species. It's basically your category 1B species, because that's most of the species we're dealing with. It's not good versus bad. It's how you manage them will depend on the species. And climate change is just going to make it worse. Most of the Nitrobacter species, or the leguminaceous species like the gums, the wattles, the pines, those are going to be worse with climate change. So alien invasive species that are not endemic. So there's alien invasive and there's alien. So if it is listed, it's an alien and invasive species like lantana. But roses are also alien because they are not endemic in this country. So, but they are not listed. So there's so that's the differentiation between an alien and invasive species, which is listed, and an alien species, which is not endemic to the country, but is grown in the country. Okay, so moving on to trees. So now we're going back to the left-hand side of the diagram, okay, which we're looking now at densification and the urban greening, which is basically going back to SDGs 11 and the link to the GBF 12, which promotes planting of trees in urban areas to significantly increase the area, quality, connectivity, and access to benefits from green urban spaces. It promotes the mainstreaming of green spaces in all urban planning, but with indigenous species, not invasives. This also links to the UNDECA ecosystem restoration, which says you have to plant 10 billion trees, but also indigenous trees. And this is where the carbon sequestration, carbon capture comes into, where you actually want to be able to plant species to capture the carbon and sequestrate the carbon in the soil so that you don't release the carbon into the environment and exacerbate climate change. The big picture needs to be considered as everything is interconnected. The gums and bees conundrum has been resolved. As only 3.5% of the gums are important to the honey industry. However, 50% of the gum is produced, 50% of the honey, is produced from eucalyptus species, Cladocalis, but a permit is needed, which is not a big thing to get. The risks of invasive species needs to be understood, accepted, and taken into account. Alien invasive species risks are important, as the species need to be controlled and managed in line with national and international regulations, protocols, and agreements. Urban greening is important, but care needs to be taken when the species are chosen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and thank you for rushing through the rest of it. That was really, really interesting. And I'm going to ask if do you have a book where there are pictures, perhaps, so that we would be able to identify the invasives so maybe I can get that from you and share it by email later. That would be really great.
Yes, I've got a book of all the 85 ukes in the country, which are invasive, which are not. Yes, I can send that to you.
100%. And then thank you for making the distinction between aliens and alien invasive species. That's really important. and it was good to get the other side of what we've heard from earlier. And the hope for me is that in the conversations there are multi-stakeholder talks about these kinds of things. Because some of the earlier presentations brought up points around, like you said, the choice of trees and looking at which are the best trees for urban planning. So thank you. I just want to see if were there any questions? How to get Parks Department to remove how to get them to remove listed alien invasive species in urban areas. So sorry, I'm just going to hijack that question because one of the concerns that I have is we've got these alien invasives and they are being targeted to be removed, but are they being replaced? Are those trees being replaced? So I get the concept that there's not a good tree and a bad tree, there's tree management. But for me, the worst tree is no tree. So if we're targeting a lot of species and removing the trees, what is replacing them? And are we actually doing that? Or are we just being left with, these glaring, barren, hot landscapes? All right. So I would like to move on to David Gwynn Evans. Now, David is where more biodiversity is coming in. And David is also, this whole webinar is off topic for UnPoison, and David is slightly off topic for the webinar because David is also more focused on the fynbos biome rather than I believe, rather than tree cover. However, I went to David's launch of his biodiversity app called Bio, and I was just aghast with his presentation on the state of biodiversity in the Cape. And as this webinar was going to happen, the two link in. Even though we're moving a little bit away from trees, we're also looking at biodiversity loss due to development and infrastructure, etc. And there were some very hard-hitting points that kept me up after I attended David's launch. Now, David, I can't see you for some strange reason. Right, there you are. Okay.
And you can hear me, I presume.
I can hear you, and you've got a very
Okay.
interesting format going on there with yourself and the screen right next to you.
Okay, I think I can change that like this. Does that work for you?
Yeah, because that's much
Is that
better.
better?
Yeah,
Okay, wonderful.
So
Well,
I'm going
thank
to let
you.
you introduce yourself and off you go.
My name's David Gwynn Evans. I'm CEO of the NGO casabio.org, and our aim is to make a face and a place for every species on Earth. So that is to say, what a plant or animal looks like and where it occurs. So that's part of citizen science. And I'm going to share some insights that I've gleaned over my time during the walk, the Peace Tree Pilgrimage Walk, a pioneering route across the Overberg by Isle Cats. And welcome and thanks for joining me in this graveyard shift. So it takes place in the Overberg area, which is the Southern Cape, and it starts at a region called Caledon. And Caledon is a little town with an incredible flower show in the past, but that no longer takes place. And perhaps part of the reason is this is the slopes above Caledon. It is possibly the worst invasion of pine and other aliens infused in it in the Cape that I've seen. But it starts from Caledon and it wends its way towards Platbos. So the prior speaker, Krieger is proprietor and owner of Platbos, and it's an incredible forest in the south. And this is just a scene from it. But along the way, we passed these beefwood trees, which are an example of trees that are not known to be invasive or weren't in the Cape. And in the last I'd say the last 5 years, they've started to become really insidious. So that's one of those things that might be due to climate change, but may also just be things that have come, something that's happening, but it's happening across the Cape. So it's quite strange. So the Overberg is very much characterized by a whole set, an agricultural region. There are sheep everywhere and lots of agriculture. And this is the canola that is so prevalent in the region. But as beautiful as it looks, it is a tragedy. And I'll explain why in a few moments. Because there are incredible plants. This is a little Mr. Petalon. It's a parasitic plant, a hollow parasite, meaning it has no chlorophyll, doesn't photosynthesize, and it's pollinated by mice. Very cool little thing. This is Aristea biflora. Incredible flowers. Gladiolus and yours truly in the picture. There's orchids there abounding and plentiful. And you may recognize this, the astute amongst you. This is a little hibiscus. But it's not just the plants that there are a plethora of insects and beasticules of various kinds and herbivores as well. Now, while pollination is one of the things that these insects do, the herbivores in particular like to eat plants, and they eat the agricultural plants as well as the natural area. Now, here, circled in red, is a little fragment of biodiversity, a little patch of renosterfelt, less than 0.5% remaining in the world, highly threatened. And here you can see why, because it occurs in the lowland regions. Now, what happens is the herbivores in that area, they expand into the agricultural regions, these highly palatable, these deserts effectively of green stuff. And Rachel Carson wrote a book, Silent Spring, and I haven't read the book, but when I was on this pilgrimage, I realized it was incredibly quiet for the spring time. And I thought, what's going on here? And thinking about it, I realized the following. Fragmentation due to agriculture leads to these herbivores leaving these tiny fragmented areas for the agricultural areas. These herbivores are then poisoned by pesticide. The predators that remain in these fragments, they then lack food. Higher order predators, such as birds, then lack food as well. Pollinating insects die. Plants that require pollination in these fragments die out as well. Due to their being protected from fire, there's a lack of fire, which means the vegetation becomes old, senescent, and moribund. And then herbicide is applied to the vegetation. This reduces the vegetation to weeds. So it's this incredible circle of decreasing biodiversity. And this is an example of an area that was graded in order to reprofile the road verges. And you can see just how little biodiversity is there. This is after a burn, as you can see on the side, and what should be coming up is loads of seeds. But reprofiling completely ruins the seed profile as well as the intactness of the soil. This has been done across the Agulhas Plains, as you can see in this picture here, re-echoed here, and it's completely barren on the sides of the roads. But what comes up in these roadsides are weeds. And when you combine these weeds with herbicide, that which has been done here, the weeds become entrenched and exacerbated, and they then the seed of these weeds are cast into fields, and the farmers take it upon themselves to herbicide the weeds. So let's just roll back. We've gone from a woody mixture of wood and bulbous plants and biodiversity to an almost monoculture of weeds that require constant maintenance, including toxic pesticides. And that's not just along the roads, it's along the railway lines as well that crisscross our landscapes. Some of you may recall traveling 10, 20 years ago and finding the windscreens covered with insects. That no longer takes place. I see someone else became aware of it. There's a hashtag wildware, and I just found this minutes ago. So I see I'm not alone in recognizing this as a major alarm bell. That is, it's a massive thing. It's not just a few insects or flagship species, it's across the board. So this requires huge funding. How much funding have we got for observations? Well, let's contrast this with physics. Physics, the Large Hadron Collider, costs $4.6 billion. It has an ongoing cost of $5.5 billion per annum. Just recall that. In fact, recall that electricity cost of 23 million per annum. But this is seeking out a particle that lasts for less than a trillionth of a billionth of a second. No use to the majority of people, I think you'll agree. The James Webb Telescope, beautiful pictures, cost $10 billion. The closest planet is Venus, 41 million kilometers away. And the nearest galaxy is 25,000 light years away. Putting that into kilometers, it's 236 quadrillion kilometers, give or take. I won't make the mistake of our friend Zuma here. How much has Earth observations received? iNaturalist is the largest citizen science platform in the world. They've received $10 million in 2023. That was less than the electricity for the Large Hadron Collider. The Bioscape project, our biggest project to date in the Cape, has received just $2.5 million. It's funded by NASA, funded by America. Now, I asked ChatGPT to draw me up a picture denoting these differences, and this is what it gave. It gives some sense of scale, but it's entirely incorrect. This is what happens if you scale it properly. You see that little dot on the left? That's 10 times larger than it should be. And that's what Earth observations and iNaturalist and Bioscape combined have received. It's a minuscule amount for those plants that affect us on a daily basis. So we're losing habitats rapidly. What are the kind of drivers of this habitat loss? I'll go through them. So mining up our west coast, there's Tronox mining, and they are mining for minerals in these rich red sands. But these sands are not just rich of minerals, they're rich for biodiversity, like this diacia, which was recently described, this babyon on the right-hand side. And incidentally, for the bee lady, these diacias are pollinated by bees, and each diacia has its own unique species of bee that is a red reviver bee that seeks oil. They're oil-collecting bees. They're beautiful mesoms like this that have lasted millions of years, but don't stand a chance against mining. And this strip mining is exhaustive. And it's not just happening on the west coast, but our Richtersveld area along the Luderitz area is set to be beset by major change for hydrogen infrastructure in the near future. So this is exceedingly worrying. Okay, on to poaching. Another challenging point. We have to resort to triage as casualties pile up due to the collecting of succulents. Huge amounts of succulents seized, but this is the tip of the iceberg of what's out there. There's things like Kumara hemanthifolia, which only occurs in a very limited area, and yet look at what's happening with the species. And so as these species are collected, they're stored temporarily in glass houses, but there's no substitute for them being in nature. And you can't readily put them back in nature either. This on the left-hand side shows what was versus what is now the case after severe poaching. And that is the extent to which this poaching is undertaken. There's the Camara of earlier. If we look at Clivia mirabilis, one of our most recently discovered clivias, only known from a single locality, iNaturalist, a citizen science platform, makes the localities for the species imminently accessible. And this makes poaching of these species really easy to undertake. And we need to stop that. Their stopgap solutions are not good enough. Casa Bio, my own NGO, hides localities to 20 by 20 kilometer scale. That's better. If you need the exact locations, you can apply for them. So, invasive species. This is the beefwood that I spoke of earlier, Casuarina. And if you didn't believe that it's invasive, across the Cape, here it is starting to invade. And what is the impact of the aliens in combination with climate change? With climate change comes increased rainfall, density, huge rainfall events. And this in the last 10 years has led to these mass wasting events, these landslides. So take a look. This is the Riffius Ent Mountain that I talked of earlier. Well, it's close to Caledon, so I didn't quite speak of it. But this is the scarring that's coming from these kinds of areas across the Cape. These are new. This is the Groenlandberg in the Kuchelberg area, our most biodiverse area. And look what's happening. Now, again, I speak of the canary in the coal mine. This is not in itself a huge problem, but it is indicative of radical impacts and changes from climate change and irrefutable proof that densification of downpours is happening.
Dave, I just want to say, are you okay? We're going to go 10 minutes over. Do you think you'll be done in 10 minutes?
I'll be done in probably 3 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. So road reserves are the final thing I want to tackle, hopefully final. In South Africa, we've got 750,000 kilometers of roads with about 10 meters on each side of the road. If we add up all this area, we've got 15,000 square kilometers. To put this in perspective, the Kruger National Park, our #1 reserve and our largest reserve in the country, is only 1/4 larger. So the difference is that the Kruger National Park has a minuscule number of species occurring in the park relative to our road reserves. Why do I say that? In Europe, road reserves contain 40% of each country's species. In South Africa, we've got 22, let's call it 23,000 species, so around 9,000 species that should be in the road reserves. But Greg Nicholson walked just 700 kilometers of road, and he found 640 species, of which 63 were red listed, that's on the threatened list, and that's a single route between Namibia and Cape Town. So you can imagine there's a hell of a lot more species held in these road reserves. So it's critical that we treat these road reserves with the utmost of care. And all it takes is for us not to do the following: destroy the road verges. Here's our current maintenance practice. It's the erroneously named greenwashing road verge maintenance. And this is what they're doing. They take out the vegetation on the side. They are herbiciding it and grading it. Here you can see both practices applied at the same place. And they are mowing it. This is taken 4 days ago on the way up to Swellendam. And they have just freshly mown the road verge. And I was incensed to see they were going up the roadside. That's probably 20, 30 meters up the roadside, far beyond any impacts that could be negative. And they are undermining the integrity of this vegetation. And this is the result after a few cycles of this road verge maintenance. This is highly undesirable, incredibly expensive to maintain, and leads to farmers and the like taking the law into themselves and herbiciding it. So the ecological services provided by intact road verge biodiversity, you can print screen and come to this later, but essentially rainfall is absorbed into the ground much better. They provide clean air and water, pollination services, and most importantly for the roads and the drivers, there's reduced monotony due to this diversity of plants that combats driver fatigue. On the other hand, if you undertake the road verge maintenance improperly, there's immediate biodiversity loss, the animals are killed, erosion increases, weeds encroach, there's a cycle of weeds and herbicide, and the road edge is undermined due to erosion, and this poses a danger. Someone was telling me the other day that they saw a car roll in front of them, which hit the edge, the lip of the road. And there's driver fatigue due to monotony. So, what are we doing about it? We have a plan to document the biodiversity using a system like this where QR codes are put on poles, and citizen scientists can document the plants between these QR coded poles. As Africans, we need African solutions. We can't rely on overseas solutions, and we have the assets for it. I'd like to thank the CSIR, one of our partners, and we are Casabaya. This is our website. It's under constant development, but we are so close to being useful. So I've said here your future biodiversity project platform, but it's also our futuristic biodiversity platform. Here are my contact details, and I wish to thank you and Anna so much for this amazing platform that she's put on, and all the speakers so far. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dave, for rounding it off. We got the botanist and the arborist into the same conversation, albeit different topics. And I hope that we will collaborate and that you will collaborate with some of the other people that were on the webinar. I've already seen requests for your contact details, Dave. Again, not tree cover related, but the roadside verges. There are a number of us, UnPoison and Nanette from Poison Free Peninsula, and Councillor Franklin are all working towards this pesticide-free verges. And I think that working together with being able to monitor the species and getting citizen science involved would be a really significant development for that. And just also bringing to light to those that work in the city and any officials in the room and in the webinar or wherever this lands up, the importance of our roadside reserves that you've mentioned, Dave. They're accessible, they're easy to get to, and they represent, did you say 700 square kilometers or 700 kilometers?
750,000 square kilometers, yeah.
Which is absolutely radical when it comes to preserving our incredible natural heritage. So,
and what's very, sorry, Anna, what's very scary is I've just seen, I think it's 50 million, I hope it's not 50 billion, but 50 million has been allocated to road verge maintenance. So there's this huge threat that's coming online right now, and I don't know what to do about it. So I'm appealing to everyone here, please get a hold of me. Let's work on a solution to reduce this. I spoke to the person on the side of the road, and he said, there's nothing we can do. It's in SANRAL's hands. They're a government institution. Sorry, nothing you can do about it.
So I think it's a matter of official policy integrating with SANRAL and whoever else on the roads management agency. And voices like yours are imperative to have in the conversation. Thank you, everybody, for staying over time. There will be a recording of the webinar. Please mail me if you would like the presentations from the speakers. I will share those with you. Please go check out unpoison.org. We are working hard to change as part of the food system transformation movement, and we work to change and influence policy and regulation around agrochemicals and pesticides. And Thank you so much for your interest in this topic, and please take it further into the places that can really impact how we manage Cape Town's future growth and the preservation of our green and biodiverse spaces. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day, and good to be with you.